I'm Kenisha Linton from the University of Greenwich. I'll be talking to you today about ethnicity pay gaps, so identifying the data and figuring out what to do with that data. So what I will cover, why ethnicity pay gaps are important, how to collect the data and analyze the results of your data, exploration and meaningful actions that can be taken, and the benefits and resources of looking at your ethnicity pay gap. So just yesterday, 16th of September, is it 15th? Yesterday was the 15th? I'm mixing up the dates now. So just yesterday, the CIPD called for mandatory ethnicity pay gap reporting to be introduced in the next 2 years after they looked at figures and found that just 13 of UK's top 100 listed companies currently report ethnicity pay gap. So why is it important for us to understand the difference in terms of hourly mean salary for white and well, BAME, depending which terminology you want to use. So when I say Black, I mean BAME. When I say BAME, I mean Black and minority ethnic. So sometimes we use the terms together. So the issue of equality, diversity, and inclusion are important to people in all contexts, including our business today, which is why the CIPD has been pushing for the reporting of the ethnicity pay gap to be mandatory for organizations. Now, having an ethnicity pay gap does not mean that an organization is guilty of discrimination. What it's simply saying to you is that there may be issues within the organization that are being masked by these numbers. And by having this data, you're able to dig in and find out what are the barriers that are being faced by different groups within the organization around barriers to career progression. So for example, this slide shows, and this is from the CIPD in 2017, where they show that barriers to career progression are experienced based on ethnicity, gender, etc. And this graph shows that if you're Black and minority ethnic, you will have a lower chance in terms of career progression or lower rate of career progression in organizations. And looking at ethnicity pay gap can help you to identify other issues that might be going on in organizations that impact the pay gap for these groups. So in terms of collecting data, workforce demographics are an important tool for decision making, and this includes ethnicity pay. So in terms of measuring the ethnicity pay, so we're talking about average pay for British employees. In terms of the headline figure that the Office of National Statistics use is based on average hourly wage for the difference between white and BAME employees in organizations. So in terms of measuring the gaps, you are trying to detect defects in pay and progression structures. Could the pay gap be masking different problems within the business, and how do you go about addressing those bigger issues? Because if you don't identify what are the patterns for your organization and have data that really gives you insight into what the issues might be, then it's very difficult to make decisions as to how to address some of the issues for diversity. So having the data is important. And what's also important is that there can be when you look at data, you'll see the headline, what the gap is. But when you drill down, you will find that for different groups, there will be different gaps. For example, when we think of the fact that there will be differences in ethnicity pay gap based on age. So the size of the ethnicity pay gap for those aged 30 and above are greater than those in the age group of 16 to 29. And example also, the ethnicity pay gap is larger for men than women through most ethnic groups. So for both white and BAME, the gender difference shows that men tend to earn more than women. Also, there are gaps for different regions. So ethnicity pay gap across region is largest in London, so 23.8% in terms of the ethnicity pay gap, and it's the smallest in Wales. So obviously population demographics will have an impact on how big the gap is for particular companies, depending on where they operate or the type of employees they're recruiting from a particular region. So this graph is also from the Office of National Statistics. So the data was from 2019, and they haven't produced any data since on the ethnicity pay gap. And the hourly median pay between white and ethnic minority groups have narrowed to the smallest since 2012. So what is this saying? Is this the same pattern for your organization? And what does this narrowing of the gap mean for career progression and people's engagement in the workplace and happiness in the workplace? I mentioned this earlier around the fact that specific gaps can vary. So when you look at, so most of the ethnic minority groups analyzed continue to earn less than white British employees. But in 2019, those of Chinese, white Irish, well, most of the Black and minority ethnic groups tend to, well, the Asian groups actually tend to earn a higher salary than white British employees. So when you think of BAME as just one aggregated group, it can, there can be discrepancies, because if you look at the fact that our Chinese and Indian groups are earning more than white, then it means that when you average out the ethnicity pay gap, it's not really telling the correct or the full story. So really digging in and finding out which groups are at a disadvantage and what can be done is very important. So in terms of the results, so it is possible to calculate the ethnicity pay gaps for all groups at all levels in terms of hourly, basic pay, total pay, bonuses. So it's dependent on the organization, what they are looking for. So how do gaps vary for men and women, job tenure, all of that can be looked into. And how do they interact with other protected characteristics such as disability, sexuality, and I also mentioned age earlier, so you can disaggregate for other protected characteristics to see how they overlap. Once you have these figures, the next step is interpretation. What do you do about this? So having independent partners can guide this process and diminish in-house bias, and it can help to, well, these can actually hinder the development of solutions on how to address the ethnicity pay gap. So yes, it's about collecting the data, but how you interpret and take actions is also a crucial step. So exploring the results and taking action. Other data sources are also helpful. So once you have the data, it's not just based on the quantitative data. There are interviews that are carried out, focus groups. We try to understand what's going on in the organization. If we're seeing trends in the data, then we can interview particular groups within the workforce to find out what might be the barriers for career progression. It could be, or it could be, well, it varies based on sector, because we've worked with private sector and public sector, and you find that in different parts of the organization, once you start talking to employees and leaders within the organization, you identify specific to that case, you know, what can be done to address the ethnicity pay gap there. So the purpose of the exercise is to pinpoint practices that may give rise to pay gap or cause barriers to progression. And the most important thing is working to change these. So it is necessary, as I said, we've spoken to employees and leaders about this, and identifying and establishing milestones. So once we go through the data, make sense of it, and start to plan actions, we prioritize these actions based on short-term goals, long-term targets, etc. And benefits and resources. So transparency and willingness to follow through is important. And again, the leadership of the organization determines this. Being open about the ethnicity pay gap and their meaning and having a plan to reduce them can help organizations in their relationship with staff and their customers. And we know that the CIPD is mandating ethnicity pay gap over the next couple of years. And this is important because it's going to help organizations to retain their employees, and also to ensure that employees feel maximally utilized, yes, but that there is fairness and the retention comes out of people's experience, positive experiences in organizations. So myself with the team, Leroy was supposed to be delivering this presentation. He's not well today, so I'm covering for Leroy. So I work with Leroy on looking at ethnicity pay gap, and we can help you to develop solutions in this area. And I look forward to talking to some of you soon. So thank you for listening.